From the political arena to school board meetings, the battle over critical race theory continues to heat up.
Putting critical race theory into our classrooms is taking our nation in the wrong direction.
My message to the Board of Ed: stop indoctrinating our children.
More than 20 states have introduced legislation that would limit teaching critical race theory.
Tennessee recently passed laws banning the teaching of certain concepts dealing with racism.
A state bill has been labeled as the effort to stop critical race theory from Texas classrooms.
Several states like Rhode Island and Missouri are considering bills that would stop schools from teaching more about concepts like sexism and racism.
Governor Ron DeSantis is banning the teaching of critical race theory in all Florida schools.
Telling my child or any child that they are in a permanent oppressed status in America because they are Black is racist.
Well, I've invited parents from coast to coast who have polarizing opinions on this controversial system of ideas and its impact on their children to discuss this hot topic on this stage. But before we meet them, I want to welcome an academic that I have an awful lot of confidence in. He's taught critical race theory for over 13 years. You've seen him here before. It's his belief that the concerns about critical race theory have been blown out of all proportion. Please welcome Race and Equity Director at the University of Southern California, Dr. Shaun Harper. Dr. Harper, thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
You say you think it's blown all out of proportion. Why do you say that?
Critical race theory is now more than 4 decades old, right? It was established by legal scholars in the 1970s. It is really clear to me that what we're seeing right now across the nation is in response to the uprisings that we saw all around our country, right, in response to the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Those murders forced a national conversation about structural and systemic racism. And I think lots of parents and uninformed Americans are conflating conversations about structural and systemic racism with critical race theory. And they're lumping it all under the umbrella of critical race theory.
Well, that to me is a very important distinction. Are you objecting to aspects of our history that have to do with the violation of the rights of Black Americans?
No.
Earlier. What is it that you object to?
Absolutely not. We must teach history. We should teach history, all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Certainly slavery was a blight on this nation, is a blight, and we need to make sure that all generations, current and those still coming, know exactly what happened. That's why I'm not a fan of, we had a meeting at our school board about a Confederate flag being shown in the room. A teacher brought a Confederate flag into the room, and some students got upset and they voted on whether or not to ban it. I don't want the Confederate flag banned. I want my children to see that flag. I want them to know about the atrocities that were committed on the ground beneath it. So I don't have a problem with the teaching of history. One of the issues with CRT is if it's coming to K-12, where's it coming from? Is this a big brother? Is this a top-down federal Department of Ed curriculum? Is this locally done? Is this state-run?
So was there an actual proposal that someone was bringing to your school district to teach critical race theory specifically?
The district at which I made internet viral fire was the board voting whether or not to bring CRT in any fashion of it whatsoever into the K-12 curriculum.
Yeah, see, I'm afraid that what was likely happening there is that anything being taught about race and racism in America was being lumped into this bucket called CRT. That is, frankly, disrespectful to the intellectual genius that was Derrick Bell, a tenured Black male professor at Harvard University. It's disrespectful to Kimberly Crenshaw, a brilliant Black woman who is a professor at Columbia University and UCLA Law School, who've been laboring in the trenches for decades on these very important legal concepts and principles. I think it's intellectually lazy and disrespectful to lump anything related to the teaching of race and racism and oppression in our nation into this category of CRT.
My name is Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am absolutely for critical race theory. I have 2 boys, ages 21 and 23. My son's school was academically rigorous, and so when I was helping them with their homework, I flipped to the back of the book and I was like, hey, there's a lot of stuff missing. I believe that our system was created by and for white people, specifically white men. I think the teaching of critical race theory does nothing but benefit all children. In Germany, they've studied the Holocaust, and I think their education is so much richer because of it. If you look at Asians and Pan-Pacific Islanders, the Latinx community, and Native Americans, we've all studied the history of the dominant culture, and we're okay. We need to understand critical race theory so that we have a better understanding of where we were and where we're headed. I say let people come to their own conclusions after studying this, but let it be studied. I believe that in withholding information, people are doing more harm than good.
Well, Laura, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You've been listening to everything we've been talking
I
about.
have, and I want to thank you for your definition. I did not understand that critical race theory was something that was taught at the university level only. So I just want to take that label off of what I'm addressing, because
Sure.
I think that it interferes.
So what are you addressing?
So from my own personal experience, I have 2 sons, as you saw in the package there, and I was a very hands-on mom while they were in school, and they would be studying, you know, the kings of Prussia and Russia and all these different monarchs. And I would help them with their homework and quiz them and flip to the back of the book looking for kings that weren't white. Like, where are all the people of color in these history books? And finding none. And then so going to the administrators at my kids' school and going to the teachers and just asking, why aren't we incorporating stories about kids who look like my kids? Why aren't we talking about the accomplishments of these Black, brown, and Asian people who helped, not just helped, I mean, enslaved Africans built this country.
I'm working on a project right now about Dr. Charles Drew, and so it led me, in talking with the producer, to choose 10 Black people who have really contributed to American history. Dr. Charles Drew, who's the father of the blood bank. Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress. Claudette Colvin, at age 15, refused to sit at the back of the bus. This was before Rosa Parks. Bessie Coleman, world's first licensed Black pilot. Ethel Waters, first Black American to star in her own TV show back in 1939. Gordon Parks, first Black American on the staff of Life magazine. Alvin Ailey, globally renowned dancer and choreographer. Jane Bolin, 1939, first Black female judge in the entire country. Benjamin O. Davis Sr., first Black military general. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler, first Black female doctor in the United States. They're not being taught about in the curriculum. Why is that happening?
Yeah, so part of it is that we don't do a good enough job of teaching teachers the truth about America's racial history. And you can't teach what you don't know. So there's that. I have enormous appreciation for history, but I also want us to teach the truth about the contemporary disadvantaging of communities of color. I want to be very thoughtful here. I don't want my people to be only seen as victims, but I do think that we are doing a disservice to our democracy when we fail to help students understand that racism is not just a historical thing. It's not just a thing of the past, but there are far too many systems and structures that continue to cyclically reproduce racially disparate outcomes among people of color on just about every metric in our nation. There's way too much evidence.
So if you're talking about in the aggregate that these things happen, I don't disagree with you. The question then becomes, do we fold that into a K-12 curriculum? And that's what we're here to discuss.
My name is Sarah Dean, and I am a mom from Seattle, Washington. I have an 8-year-old son. Here's what I know about raising an 8-year-old white son. He was born in America as a white male. It doesn't get better than that in terms of opportunity. I, as a mom, feel a huge sense of responsibility as a white woman to make sure that he's in an education system that teaches him what has happened in our country over the course of hundreds of years. I'm a white woman in a middle-class community. I don't feel only a sense of responsibility to my son. I feel a sense of responsibility to his Black and brown friends.
My name is Taylor, and I'm an educator in Texas. There is a real misconception about what critical race theory is and how it's being taught in our schools. I think a lot of educators are being criticized with people thinking that we're teaching white privilege in kindergarten classrooms, and that's just not happening. I support critical race theory being taught to older students in high school. As students get older, a lot of the truths of how our nation was founded come to light in history classes. Then teachers can have developmentally appropriate conversations with these students. I think a lot of people think if we don't talk about racism, that it'll just go away. Let's be honest, racism is deeply rooted in our nation's history, and it needs to be discussed.
Taylor, you believe our kids need to know the whole story.
I do agree. We're raising global citizens here. Okay, that's what we do as teachers and as educators. We prepare students for a diverse world.
Is there a difference in your mind between teaching them history and putting a social vector with that history? And by that I mean, some parents object to the fact of saying, okay, here's what happened, and then this is what that means for you now socially in terms of where your compass should point, what your conscience should tell you to do, how you should act, interact, and behave with your classmates and students, particularly if they're of a different color.
Teachers should teach the curriculum that's provided by their state, regardless of their personal beliefs, so that students can make their own decisions about those factors that you mentioned at the end of your question.
What are your thoughts on this?
So I really appreciate what Taylor said about raising global citizens. And so if I'm looking at this through the lens of how do I raise this child who's a global citizen in a way that he can be conscientious of our history, then I have to look at how am I raising a child that can be a critical thinker. And when it comes down to critical race theory in school, we're looking at teaching our children how to be critical thinkers and how to interpret data and research and history in order to then take that into leadership across all organizations and across the globe.
Yeah, because we're raising adults, not children.
Exactly.
Right.
As adults, we write on the slate of who our children are. And our teachers are with our children 40% of their waking hours. So that's really important, what they're saying to our children. And as parents, we should pay attention to that and have our voices heard about what's being said. And I would suggest this, if you do have opinions about this one way or the other, don't run up the stairs at your school with your hair on fire hysterically. Go in and ask and find out what's being taught. And if somebody says, CRT or whatever, find out what they mean by that. Look at the curriculum, see what is actually being taught, and respond to the actual substance of what's being taught. You have a right to weigh in. And we ran way over today, and I'm going to put what doesn't make it in the show today on the website.
Stop indoctrinating our children.
Critical race theory. It's been branded a poison in your child's classroom.
Enslaved Africans built this country.
We are pitting our children against each other based on the color of their skin.
New Dr. Phil. Check your local listings.
Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.